Excellent. So we'll call this meeting to order. This is the October 14th, 2020 school committee workshop. It's being held remotely via Zoom due to the COVID-19 closure. Unlike a sort of a regular meeting, we have sort of an abridged agenda. We're trying to get some specific items done that we couldn't cover in our last meeting due to time. So we have our agenda today is a call to order. We have two discussion items. We have the MASC resolution on MCAS and high stakes testing, and we have a discussion item for the draft district goals and improvement plan 2020-2021. We have a number of future agenda items, some which we'll be addressing next week, some which are still future. We have future meeting dates, and we have adjournment. And with that, I would like to be efficient with all of our times today, because this is an add-on meeting. This is not one we had originally planned. So I'd like to dive right in to the first agenda item. The first agenda item was something that I previewed in the chair report at our last meeting. It was a resolution being put forward by MASC regarding MCAS and high stakes testing. It was actually brought to me as a suggestion by one of our members as something that we consider. You'll note that we only have this as a discussion item today because I wanted to limit today's workshop to just being discussion. And if we choose to, we could vote on this next time. But I would like to ask, I also like this to be somewhat less formal than usual because it's a workshop. So forgive me if I use first names. I'd like to ask Zena if she would be willing to kick this off, since she was the one who brought this forward, and I think it's a great idea. Zena, are you willing to introduce this a little bit?
Sure. When I first read it, I felt that it was important to consider it. Sorry, I have a million Zooms in my house too. Is very important to consider it given our stance on MCAS and high stakes testing in general, and in this time when we are just trying to assess the well-being, social emotional states, and our innovation in online learning. I think that it's important for us to consider whether or not high stakes testing will cause more harm than help at a time like this. They are purported to be for accountability, and I don't think that this is a good measurement for accountability in general, and especially at a time like this. So I wanted us to consider supporting the Massachusetts Association of School Committees resolution.
Oh, I'm muted, sorry. Thank you so much, Zena. Judy, do you have an opinion, thoughts on this that you'd like to, before we have discussion? Everyone should have received a copy of this. It was emailed out yesterday by Judy. Judy, if you have any thoughts.
Happy to weigh in on this. As you know, our work with the consortium, the MCIEA group, with other districts, is focused on two parallel efforts. One is using student surveys and community and parent survey data to develop a dashboard that gives a more holistic picture of an individual school's strengths and challenges. And the second pillar is our work with performance assessments, where we're trying to both engage students, change the model that schools are using to assess what students know and are able to do, have more authentic learning experiences. And so we've really made a significant amount of progress towards developing very high quality performance assessments, using them in the district and validating them through cross-district work. So the MCIA work has reinforced my belief, and I believe our district's belief, that measuring what students know and are able to do is best done through a variety of different tools, and that standardized tests are a very poor way to do that in general. Our students do very well on standardized tests, but when there's a focus in any district on preparing students for one single test on one day or a number of days, in this case with MCAS, you sacrifice other more authentic learning experiences. So my feeling, and I think I can speak for the leadership team on this, is that the state's focus on computer-based standardized tests like MCAS, where we don't get the results for a long time. It's more like an autopsy than actually an assessment. We know what it is showing about a snapshot in time, but the snapshot in time for this year, I think, is one that does not give us a clear picture of student learning and will add unnecessary anxiety. We only have 170 instructional days this year. To lose any of them to MCAS testing seems to me to be not a good decision. That being said, I think that there are a lot of people across the state who would agree with this. Clearly, MASC has put forward this resolution. There are other districts that will agree with us. There are some who may feel differently. The commissioner has said that he would need a federal waiver, which the feds are not likely to give in relation to this standardized testing. But it seems to me to be imprudent to move forward with it if we're able to avoid doing so. At this point, it would be an act of civil disobedience for us to not participate in MCAS. That would have to be something the school committee would support. But the resolution is urging the state to have a moratorium on MCAS testing for this school year. I would strongly support that. And we have not yet made a decision about our participation this year. If it were my decision, we would certainly not participate. But this is, I think, the first steps in a discussion, and I hope will generate a wider statewide discussion.
Thank you, Judy. Feedback, sorry. Any comments or questions from the committee about this the resolution? Chris?
So a couple of, I guess I have a question first and then a few thoughts I wanted to share. Can you all hear me okay?
Yes, we can.
So we're doing first name basis this morning. Judy, has MASS rendered any public statement on this, or has the chairman of MASS spoken to this publicly in a way you can share with us?
So the executive board of MASS has met regularly with the commissioner, and when the superintendents as a group have met with the commissioner, and I think we have another phone call scheduled for tomorrow or the next day, we've made it clear that we think that this is not a good idea and have asked the commissioner to put a moratorium on MCAS for this year. And he says that he would need a federal waiver, which he's not going to get, and also state legislative action to give us another year of no MCAS testing. And he's not spoken to whether he's willing to pursue that at the state level. But I think at this point, the DESE has given up because they're hearing signals from the feds that they're not going to give waivers.
And so I just want to clarify for the school committee, when you talk about federal waiver, I'm assuming that ties back to, it all revolves around money, right? So there's about $700 million that comes to Massachusetts from the Federal Department of Education under the ESSA, which is the Every Student Succeeds Act. And that act requires that districts test their students. That doesn't mean it has to be a graduation requirement. That's a decision that Massachusetts makes. Other states don't make that requirement. So I appreciate you sharing that with us, Judy. I guess I had a couple of thoughts, Brian, I wanted to share with the committee. Every once in a while, and there have been a few instances of this, I guess, in recent memory, the school committee will receive communication from someone or a group of people, and I'll call it a demand letter. And it's on an issue in which people have some pretty strong opinions and feelings. And I always appreciate that, but what I feel sometimes is missing is that just initial conversation to understand what the issues and concerns are, what the interests are. I feel like there are lost opportunities when folks come to this school committee and demand something of us, and what we've missed is a conversation to begin with. And so I think I really can appreciate, and I sort of empathize with what's driving the potential motion or statement from MASC. But what I don't yet really understand is what's going on in the mind of the commissioner and what's going on in the minds of the State Board of Education. So it's been reported that MCAS was discussed at their meeting on Tuesday, September 29th. That surprised me because it was actually not on the agenda. And I understand it may be discussed at their upcoming meeting, but I also don't see it on the agenda. I don't understand if this is really a commissioner issue or if this is a Board of Education issue. And for me, I think what would be helpful for me to get to a place where I feel like I could support the statement, and I'm not saying I can't get there, but I'd like to just better understand what is the position right now of the state and why. So I feel like I need a little more understanding around this. And the last thing I would just share with the committee, if you're not already aware, I think two bills have already been filed on Beacon Hill. I think there's one in the House and one in the Senate that's actually looking to change state law. They're looking to basically make it a law that would waive the MCAS this year, and that's being reviewed by the Joint Education Committee. So it seems to me some folks with deeper resources than we have are looking into that and studying it carefully. So I did fire off an email to our state rep and one of our state senators just asking where we stood on the status of that, and I haven't heard back yet. And maybe there's another committee, maybe Zena knows, I don't know. So I just think there's some pieces and parts to this. It would be helpful for me to get a little more information and understanding.
Thanks, Chris. And I think that's exactly why we have this as a discussion item today and not part of the reason I didn't put it as a voting item today, because I think that if there are questions or comments and ideas that we want to understand, like where our state reps are on this, better to know that before we move ahead on voting on this, though, well, I'll leave that aside. Any other questions or comments from the committee? Michelle.
So I think that the statement that MASC is bringing forward is consistent. Having been with Jen and Judy at the MCIEA board meetings for the last 3 years, I think the statement is consistent with a lot of the goals that Winchester has been driving forward towards with MCIEA and our work in the district, as Judy mentioned. And I appreciate Chris's position on finding out where the state is on this. I can tell you historically, Senator Jalen was one of the senators that was there at the inception of MCIEA and was also a big proponent, along with Senator Lewis, last spring when the state decided to waive MCAS in the middle of the pandemic. So if past practice is any indication in future behavior, I would think this would be consistent with a lot of their beliefs. It may not be where they are right now, but it is consistent, I would think, with some of their past beliefs at any rate. So I don't think that there is anything in this that says that Winchester is absolutely going to not take MCAS this spring. I don't think there is anything in this that obligates us in any way, but I do think that sometimes DESE and the state need to hear from school committees about where their positions are on things when they do take bills up, so that they know what kind of support is in the community for actions such as this. Dr. Evans, correct me if I'm wrong, but I believe last spring when we waived MCAS in Massachusetts, that at that time we were not required to do any kind of replacement accountability system because of the pandemic. And my understanding, though, at the time was this was waived for 10th graders, but now are we going back? Is DESE going back and saying that 10th graders are now going to be held accountable for something we told them they were not going to be? Because that might be an even more compelling reason to support this action.
Right. So the latest communication that we've received from DESE regarding MCAS testing is that they're going to be offering in January an opportunity for 11th and 12th graders, last year's 10th graders, to take a replacement MCAS so that they can meet the accountability requirement. And as Chris is absolutely right, this is just a state requirement that's connecting MCAS to accountability. In some other states, they might use SAT testing or ACT testing or some other measurement. And so there is an intent to move forward to test 11th and 12th graders in January. The next test cycle after that, I believe, is the typical March and May. We have no idea where we'll be in March or May, whether we'll be more in person, whether we'll be fully remote. And what is important, I think, in this resolution is it acknowledges that the pandemic education is not what we would have wished in normal times, and that there are certainly students who have resulting trauma, that pandemic education has disproportionately had an impact on students of color, students with disabilities, and underrepresented students who are having food insecurity, other family stress. And so we think it's not going to be a valid or reliable measure of anything. And that's why we don't support taking time away from instruction and relationship building between teachers and students so that students can take a standardized test. So,
Right.
so yes, so I believe the state is fully planning at this point to move forward with all of the normal MCAS testing. We've been asking about this, obviously, as superintendents for months, and have received very little in the form of an answer. But I believe the notes that I read from the last Board of Education, State Board of Education meeting were that there were some members of the board who are very much in favor of standardized tests and want to see this move forward. And so I think there are political positions at play here as well that we have to acknowledge. But I think if we sit passively and don't make our wishes known in this regard, I think the state's going to assume that things will go forward as they have planned. And I think students will be harmed by this. And so that's why, as a superintendent, I'm speaking strongly in favor of the moratorium on testing for all students for this year.
Mr. Chairman,
And
quick
last year,
Michelle is still speaking. Sorry.
I had a point
sorry.
of information, if I could.
Is there a question?
For those who are actually watching
Sorry.
and to further appreciate what Michelle has yet to say on this, could I ask the chair, would you mind just reading what the draft resolution says so those watching can understand what we're talking about?
or can
Absolutely.
you share
Absolutely,
screen,
Chris.
Brian?
Absolutely. I will share the screen. And while I'm doing that, Michelle, if you want to continue, well, it'll take me a second. I'm a little slow at sharing screens.
Sure. Okay. I just had a quick follow-up. And Judy, I believe last year, last spring, that sort of the timeline of events was that many of the districts across the state in MASC and MCIEA and some other prominent educators and education groups initially spoke up and said that because of the pandemic and many of the factors that you mentioned, that MCAS was going to be inappropriate for our students last spring. And that was actually what spurred the state to then apply for a federal waiver. Mm-hmm. And then once we had that federal waiver, then we came back and the state was able to take action to do to put a moratorium on MCAS at that time. Is that the timeline as you remember it as well?
Yes, we had already received the materials for testing. And you might remember March is a big testing month for MCAS. And so we were well into it. But that the state, at the urging of MASC and MASS, had really put some effort and energy into trying to protect students and teachers from what they perceived as a highly inappropriate use of time during the pandemic. So I don't
Right.
think anything has changed since then in terms of our ability to and wish to subject students to standardized testing.
So if we don't have standardized testing, I can imagine the next question from the community would be, then how are we going to measure student loss? How are we going to measure academic loss and gain in this unusual time period? And my guess is that Winchester has a plan for that. Do you?
Oh, of course. We're continuing with many of the assessments that we would typically use, maybe a couple of weeks later than we would typically do it. So our kindergarten students had kindergarten screening. Our students will have all of their literacy assessments, and we'll be able to see where they are in terms of reading. We have mathematics assessments that we use. The thing about MCAS that is frustrating is by the time you have the results, students have already left that grade level and moved on. Many of them, to a new school if they're moving to middle school or high school. And the delay in getting the feedback makes it much less useful. It's more useful generally to assess how well our curriculum aligns with the state curriculum frameworks rather than how individual students do. And the vast majority of our students are extremely high performing on these tests in any case. So I'm not sure they even measure adequately what we want students to know and be able to do. I think our standards exceed the state standards in many cases. And so we have a wide variety of assessments that we use internally, including, dozens of performance assessments that will measure specific standards on the state curriculum frameworks. And we'll know by the use of those across grade levels how well we're doing in terms of how students can apply the skills and not just answer a question on a multiple choice test.
Thank you.
Sure.
Judy, can you just clarify, and then I'll move back around to the committee. Are you saying that this year's 11th graders will be required in January to take an MCAS for graduation requirement if nothing changes as of right now?
Let me answer that in a few minutes, Brian. I can pull up the email that I got from Desi in the next day or two and let you know that.
Okay, and the other thing I want to do before I move on to other questions is I think it might be actually hard to read this on WinCam. I'm going to not read all the whereases, but I'm going to read the resolved portion of this. Therefore, be it resolved that the Winchester School Committee rejects the call for students graduating in 2022 who missed their 10th grade MCAS testing to be required to make it up during the 2020-2021 school year or ever. We demand that those students be held harmless for not taking the MCAS and that their graduation requirements shall be determined by our school committee and school administration within the remaining graduation requirements of the Commonwealth of Massachusetts. Additionally, we stand with the Massachusetts Association of School Committees call for a moratorium on all MCAS testing for the 2020-2021 school year so that all students can focus on their direct instruction rather than losing additional time to testing. Thank you for bearing with me. Karen.
Okay. So, Brian, you want me to answer your question before you move to Karen?
Yes, please.
I think my question was also the same. I just didn't understand.
So there's a January high school English, language arts, and mathematics MCAS schedule. The January administration will be for students in grades 11 and 12 and beyond who've yet to earn their competency determination. The January MCAS test will be legacy tests administered on computer with a paper version available for students who require that as an accommodation. More information will be provided and posted soon. The department recognizes that conditions may change because of the evolving nature of the COVID-19 pandemic and will update plans and schedules as needed. And so students who are in grades 11 and 12 who've not earned their competency determination, I would assume that's all last year's 10th graders who did not take the test, will be taking in January language arts and mathematics MCAS if this plan is put forward. And that was released by the commissioner in his weekly update that came yesterday at 6:22 p.m.
That's on, that's on the desktop, isn't it?
It's on the desktop. Yep.
Yeah.
this is timely today then that we're having this discussion.
Yes.
And then, so not only would they take an MCAS in January, then they would come back in March, April and take another MCAS?
If they took science as ninth graders, they may not need to do science, but I'm assuming that the high school students would take the science MCAS as well if they're planning on administering it.
And that's 11th and 12th grade, or?
Normally, well, it depends on whether you've taken it in the past and passed it in the past, but normally it's taken in ninth grade. But it could be taken in any year if you haven't had taken it and passed it in the past.
Okay.
Thank you. Zena.
I just wanted to make a statement, two statements. Even though this is very focused on this year and MCAS, I really feel that, and I don't like talking in dramatic tones, but I really feel like from the federal government to our state government, public education is truly under attack right now, whether it's under-resourcing us, adding more initiatives that are unfunded. I think that there are people who do not value public education as much as they value school choice and vouchers and charters, are going to use this opportunity of a weaker state to highlight their own perceptions of where public education is not serving needs. We have seen from this pandemic how important public education is to our families nationwide. Everybody's struggling because public schools are not in full time. So you have us now being compared to private schools who are much better resourced, who have much smaller classes, who don't serve the populations of higher needs students that we serve. They're getting by and they're doing fine, and their students aren't really under the same traumas that our students are. Now, granted, Winchester has families who are who have plenty of resources to make up for any downtime that their students may have had and may continue to have, but we are where we are because of the state. They continue to pass the responsibility on to whether it's school committees or now it's the federal government's problem, when it is in fact their own policies that are hindering us from truly serving the needs of our kids. They are the ones who have this graduation requirement. They are the ones who can say we don't have to do it. So it's not fair for them to keep pushing us off like this and continuing with policies as they've always been. There is room for innovation right now, and the state needs to step up on behalf of public schools. The other thing is that this could potentially have a really serious impact for our graduating students in terms of their college applications. If now they're being forced to take MCAS when we haven't even assessed truly what they've been through, that's going to be something that reflects on them. And so I want to be adamantly in support of their holistic learning rather than these one-day tests that don't measure anything other than whether or not they are good test takers. And it is very important for us as a wealthier community to stand with our lesser resourced, larger communities like the urban communities who have a lot more higher needs students. So there are a lot of important political implications and statements that we need to be making through resolutions such as this one. Thanks, Brian.
Thank you, Zena. Karen.
Dr. Evans, have you gotten a sense from the other districts in the Middlesex League how they have perceived this resolution and what their action might be?
Sure. So I brought this up I have a small group of superintendents with whom I meet fairly regularly. in a consultancy format. And many of them are in the same position we are, where they would strongly prefer not to do the MCAS. And at least one, I think Needham Public Schools, their school committee is taking up this resolution as well. There are some districts with more urban districts have school committees who may not support a moratorium because they feel that there's a sense of accountability that comes with MCAS testing that they wish to continue. And so certainly that's not universal. All of the MCIA districts are strongly committed to replacing the MCAS with performance assessments and the dashboard based on the surveys. And so I think there could be a variety of opinions on this, but even the districts who believe that MCAS gives them some valuable information are similarly concerned about lost learning time in a year where our students are with us so little. And so there are deep concerns about that. I just shared with you, and you can look at it, I know you're not going to vote today, a page from the DESE website that outlines all of the components of testing for all of the grade levels. That clearly says that we should expect typical MCAS testing in English, language arts, math, and science and technology for grades 3 through 8. It outlines that 9th graders are expected to take the science and that the 11th and 12th graders this year expected to do the competency determination. So you can read that at your leisure to see what the DESE position is on all of the various tests and the testing timeline.
Thank you. One thing I think it should be clear while we talk about MCAS over the coming years is that this resolution is really focused on this year. It's focused on a pandemic year. It's focused on students who last year didn't get an opportunity to take an exam because of a pandemic, and now are being told that they must take it out of order, out of sequence, essentially, in order to potentially in order to graduate, as well as spending a year where we have 10 fewer educational days that we have to then continue to devote time to the MCAS. So while the big picture of looking at MCAS over the coming years is something that we may or may not choose to talk about, this is really focused on last year and this year. And I just think that's something to keep in mind so that we don't get lost in sort of whether we as a committee or we as a district approve or disapprove of MCAS testing in general. This is about this year and now. So my plan is to bring this back at the next meeting. In fact, it reminds me that we didn't have this as an agenda item on our next meeting, and have it as an action item so we can decide if we choose to vote on it at the next meeting. And we'll, of course, have opportunity for discussion at that meeting as well when we get ready to vote. But unless there's any additional comments on this, I think that we can move on. But I see 2 comments from Chris.
So, well, thank you. I have a clarification. Judy, thank you for forwarding that to us. Can you just take a moment? The information that Dr. Evans has shared with the committee breaks down what are called types of tests. I wonder if Judy could just take a moment and share with us what's the differentiation between a legacy versus next generation? Because if we look over on the right, there's a legacy test in January, next generation in May, legacy paper-based in May, and a couple are optional, one of them's required. But for students in grades 11 and 12, all 3 of these are listed as optional, which I assume means, what that really means is districts have to pick one. Because if all 3 were really optional, then that would mean the testing really is not required. But I do understand the testing is required. Obviously, big differences on the calendar between February and May, irrespective of what may happen with coronavirus on top of all of that. So would it be okay, Brian, if Judy just takes a moment to clarify some of these things for us?
Of course, and I just shared the document because I have not read this. It was just shared to us by Dr. Evans, so I've not read it. but I shared the table that you're referring to from that document, and obviously I'll read it after our meeting.
And I think
Right.
this came out, at least publicly, this came out after the board meeting on the 29th. I didn't see this before the board meeting.
Yeah.
Right. So Jen can also weigh in on this as well, in terms of what the difference is between the legacy and the next generation tests. So the legacy test is more similar to the MCAS test that had been given for many years, and then it was improved, shortened, the inclusion of different kinds of questions, and an acknowledgement that it wasn't based on simple recall, but on trying to, the next generation MCAS was supposed to give students more opportunity to apply knowledge. Although what's difficult is there are lots of legacy questions available out there for the general public, but not so much of the next generation questions have been released. And so obviously those of us who've been doing MCAS for decades are much more familiar with a legacy type test. I think, Chris, the reason some of this says optional is what they want to do is give students multiple opportunities to take and retake the test. And so the reason they've got a January to February time period is so that if students take it and then don't pass, they'll have another opportunity in May to do either a computer-based or a paper-based test, depending on their needs or disabilities. And so the legacy test is supposed to go away, and it's all supposed to be next generation at some point. And I think in the midst of the transition, that's why you're seeing both kinds of tests here. The tests basically cover the same standards that students have learned. Our curriculum is aligned with the state frameworks, but often extends and goes beyond it or accelerates it. I don't know, Jen, is there anything you want to add to this that I haven't highlighted here?
I think you highlighted it well. The two big things really around supposedly the next generation is more of, like Judy said, the higher order thinking. Although I would argue we're still not getting to that with any kind of bubble test. So we should, that's a good place for civil disobedience. Reject that notion. The second thing is they changed the phrasing around your scoring categories. So on the legacy, we're back to that. At the younger grades, the fourth level is warning, and at the high school, it's failing. And so the next generation tried to revamp the category names and language for students, and we're returning to the legacy for our high school kids in January.
Thank you. Thank you, Jen. Thank
Can
you,
I
Judy.
clarify then, Brian? So what I just want to be sure I'm hearing, because obviously we're on this bus, but we're not driving this bus. So if in fact the MCAS, if there should be a requirement that MCAS is administered, am I hearing it's the administration's preference that we would administer in January the legacy, even though there is a spring option for next generation in May? Is that right?
So it would be our preference not to administer any MCAS tests, but if we're required to, and we agree as a district and school committee agrees to do this, I would think we would prefer to open the window as soon as possible for our 11th and 12th graders, because I'm sure since it's technically a graduation requirement that they would like to have an opportunity to just get that behind them and pass. Nearly all of our students pass it very easily. And those who don't pass have another route to show a competency. So it doesn't necessarily prohibit graduation. The students who typically have difficulty with MCAS are students with very significant disabilities. And so there is another category of testing, the MCAS Alt assessment, which is an alternative assessment. I don't know if Pam can speak to that.
The MCAS Alt trainings are already being offered virtually as we speak. So we're waiting to see kind of the next steps coming from DESE about what the actual test dates are, the windows are, and the requirements.
Jen.
Yeah, if I could just add one more thing about the legacy. So our students that we'll be taking the legacy test in January if we go through with the state testing, which I just want to take this opportunity to say I couldn't agree with Judy more. If there's ever a time for civil disobedience, this is it. But the one more thing for you to know and consider is that these students haven't been taking the legacy MCAS, they've been taking the next generation. So the teachers are feeling the pressure to actually use even more of our precious teaching time, which isn't really 170 days because, as you know, we have an A and B cohort. So, you know, take that in half. To use extra precious days to get the students at least from, because the formatting is different on this and the test taking is different on this. And because this hasn't been, typically our high school staff doesn't work at all on formatting or what the test looks like or how to take the test, because the students have already come to them having taken the tests. But this year, the teachers would need to do that because this will be a different kind of test than our high school students have had before. So take our precious time already, take the testing days up with it, and now also take testing prep that we wouldn't normally do. So I just thought it was important that you know that piece as well.
That's super helpful. And I think I will take more comments, of course. I just want to clarify one last point to me. If we as a district, unrelated to this resolution, choose not to have MCAS this year, it would still be a graduation requirement by virtue of the state saying it has to be, correct, for the 10th grade? I mean, we can't, can we as a district say we're not doing that, opt out of that? I don't know. It's a question.
That's a political question. What I would say is that diplomas are issued by the town of Winchester and not by the state.
Got it. Thank you. I get your political answer. And Zena, I know you had your hand raised, and then I wish we should move on because I think we've had a good discussion about this, but I do want to get to the district improvement planning goals.
My question, you don't have to answer, but how far out do you think MCIEA's model is? How many years out are we from it being ready for statewide implementation?
Wow, that's a very that's a difficult question. What I would say is there's strong political will from the MCIA board. I sit on that board, to try to use it as a pilot for the state, to show that it works to assess what students know and are able to do and what's working in schools and what's not working in schools. But the pandemic, I think, has slowed the efforts a bit. And also funding sources have been pretty scarce. And so we would need a significant influx of funding to expand our capacity to develop more performance assessments. There's really good work going on to improve the dashboard, improve the usefulness of the dashboard, and to build up the test bank of high quality, vetted performance assessments. Jen, I don't know, Jen sits on the working group and is more boots on the ground in terms of the performance assessment development. Is there anything else you want to add to that?
No, I agree. I mean, we're doing a great job, I think, as districts really implementing these, and the overview templates, which will be posted on our website this week for each of the curriculum areas. Every curriculum area throughout the district is committed to 2 common performance-based assessments this year. Lots of teachers will do many more than that with their students, but those are the 2 that everyone who teaches that grade or that course will all implement, so we can be doing the work of looking at student growth and achievement across the board on a common assessment that is truly application and higher order thinking, and is what the real world looks like in terms of collaborative and authentic, and allows for voice and choice with students so that we remove the bias that naturally comes, or we don't completely remove it, but we remove much of the bias that naturally comes with standardized testing with the performance-based assessments.
And in terms of political will, Judy, hasn't DESE also started their own effort into looking at performance-based assessments also?
Well, we've tried to collaborate with DESE on this effort, and there's certainly a recognition by DESE, and they come and they sit at the table sometimes and listen to the meetings. Certainly a support for the model that we're trying to implement. But scaling it up across the whole state and making sure that the measures are valid and reliable is something that there's not been the political will at the state level to do. What I would say is we've also collaborated with other states like New Hampshire that has a system that's much more like MCIEA system that gives a lot more district power to assess their own students and determine how well they're doing. I think there are other states that are ahead of us in this regard. There's a fear that because of our reliance on standardized tests as a measure of excellence, that we might slip in comparison to other states if we don't keep that focus. But I think it's high time we move beyond that focus and assess students in ways that are more authentic and engaging than standardized tests.
Thanks, Judy. I think that the plan will be to have this as the resolution, not any of these other issues that we're talking about, but the resolution itself as an action item at our next meeting. We, of course, are free to vote it up or down, but I will have it next Tuesday at the meeting. And with that, I'd like to, oh, hold on, Karen.
Just one last thing with regard to the resolution text itself. I guess just piggybacking on your comment from earlier, Brian, about staying focused on this year and the 11th graders this year, as opposed to our comments, or as opposed to our opinions perhaps on overall MCAS testing. I guess I'd just like to keep the first paragraph of the resolution focused more on this year rather than an overall statement on MCAS testing.
I appreciate that. Karen, are you willing to, can we wordsmith that if we want to at our next meeting?
I'm sure we can.
I meant if there's things we want to change. I don't know that unlike some resolutions, that every resolution that school committees approve must look the same. They're obviously going to be specific for different districts. So why don't I ask if just so for the to save time, if we you ponder what you think that maybe should look like, and we can discuss it at our next meeting when we go to vote it. And I appreciate what you said there, because I actually, as I was saying that, I was actually reading that again and saying, agreeing with that, but at the same time, the actual resolution at the bottom, what's resolved, is not based on anything other than this year and last year. So are you willing to, can we wordsmith that next meeting? Excellent. Thanks. No, I appreciate that though.
Brian, can you clarify for us as well prior to our next meeting, to whom would this be? It's unclear to me who this is really directed to. Is this something you envision going to Commissioner Riley? Do you see it going to the board, or is this just something that gets sent to a newspaper?
That is a good question. Zena, do you have an insight on that? Since you, again, you were the one who brought this forward, and while I support it, I hadn't really thought beyond just simply expressing our support of this as far as the action items after that.
I haven't seen what other districts are doing, but I assume that if we pass it, that it would be sent to our legislative representatives, both state and federal, possibly the governor's office, DESE, and Commissioner Riley, and the Department of Education's board chair. I forget what his real title is, but I just thought the wider net we cast, the better.
Thank you, Zena.
Maybe we can check with, I think this originally had Brockton on it.
Where was it? I can't remember.
I'm not sure. Brockton, I'm not sure. I don't even.
The resolution didn't have anything related to any specific town.
Oh, it didn't?
It
Okay.
came generic, and we've edited it already.
Right.
So it's
right.
not the original resolution from the MASC. It is tailored to what our administration and our needs are.
It actually came out of the MASC Resolution Committee. So the committee, the board that develops resolutions for the MASC board. So a collaboration of a number of towns.
But
Okay.
we've edited the template
Right.
to reflect what it's different than the original.
Yeah.
Right.
Can we touch base with them and see whom they are sending their resolution to?
I mean, we'll send it to them.
If we approve
Go
it,
ahead, Brian.
if we approve it, we can at that time decide how we would like to share it. I think. I mean, I think it's a great question of how it's going to be shared. I think if we approve it, I think it's sort of, we're sharing it with the world. I mean, anything we approve is, then how we choose to share it is just up to us. I mean, so, okay. I'm gonna move on to the next agenda item, and we will come back to this next week, I promise. And the next agenda item is a discussion item for our draft district goals and improvement plan. This was something that we wanted to get to at our last meeting, and we ran out of time. And I am going to ask Judy to kick it off. And while she does that, I'm going to try to share it if I'm capable for everybody to see.
Sure, happy to. So in a typical year, which we know this is not and has not been since last March, we begin the process of developing district goals towards the end of the school year, and then spend much of the summer meeting as a leadership team and meeting with the school committee and workshop to review the previous year's district goals and also develop new ones in an effort to focus on continuous improvement and to clearly establish the direction of the district so that the superintendent's goals, the principal's goals, the individual educators' goals all align with what the district thinks is most important. Anytime you're developing district improvement plan and goals, it's important to acknowledge that much of the work continues over multiple years. And that much of the work that we do never appears in the district goals, whether it's operational or related to ongoing projects. A lot of what we do is not as aspirational as district goals and not necessarily as specific as district goals. In the past few years, I think we've had a pretty collaborative process where we're really trying to focus on fewer district goals and have them be more measurable and have reporting happen on our progress mid-year and then at the end of the year. And if you set your goals high enough, there's certainly some things that by the end of the year you're not able to achieve. But in general, I think we've been fairly diligent and have achieved most of the goals that we've set. In the past several years, our focus in relation to district goals has really been twofold. One is goals that support individual student wellness, social emotional wellness, meet their safety and health needs, and then goals that relate to academic achievement or progress, primarily through the implementation of performance-based assessments. The performance assessment work is not just about developing the assessment. It really connects to everything we do with teaching and learning. It drives the content. It acknowledges the need for choice and voice for students. It acknowledges that they need to be grounded in authentic experiences and yet directly connected to the curriculum frameworks and the standards contained within them. And so those have been our two district goals. And the feedback that we've had from teachers has been very helpful, because it's easy to say to teachers, we're really focusing on students' social emotional well-being and on the development of high quality performance assessments and everything connected to that. And in that way, when teachers are developing their own goals for student learning and for their own professional practice, it will help guide their professional development, it'll help guide their collaboration with others, and it'll help keep the focus on the things that we think are most important. So in this pandemic year, what becomes more difficult about district goals is we're not together as much. Our collaboration is often happening electronically, and our focus for the past 4 months for 18 to 20 hours a day has been in getting schools open safely. So, but that doesn't mean we're not continuing to make forward progress on a multitude of other district goals that are ongoing. For example, the work that Jen L&M has been doing to develop curriculum guides for priority standards with associated essential questions, enduring understandings, and outlining the performance assessments that are expected, that are grade level or course-based. That work has continued, and it is the basis for the collaborative planning that teachers are doing. But all of the pieces of it require lots of individual attention and support from a variety of fronts. So I think it's important just to note that what we don't want to do is have many, many district goals that turn out to be pieces of paper in a binder, but actually things that we can live by. So this year, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education very recently put out some focus indicators for teaching and leading in relation to the educator evaluation process. You know that the individual goals are, as that you see on my evaluation process as a superintendent, are very similar to the goals both for personal growth and development and also for student outcomes, are very similar to the goals that are seen on principal evaluation instruments, which mirror the ones that you do with me, and individual teacher evaluation instruments. So that in recognition that this is an unusual year, the Department of Elementary and Secondary Education put out some focus indicators that they think are most important for education in a pandemic. And they align with the original educator evaluation indicators and standards, but they really pull out how those apply during a pandemic. So what we decided to do as a leadership team was to continue our work on the social emotional front and on high quality performance assessments, and pull from the language of the focus indicators that the state had provided and establish 2 goals. The first goal is really about operations, procedures, routines, and plans to support students' safety, health, emotional, and social needs. And so that goal has a number of action steps that are K-12 action steps that will help keep us focused on our safety, health, emotional, and social needs of our students and our members of our school communities. If you approve this goal, and I think we should discuss some of the specifics of it, then we will develop the evidence of achievement as a leadership team, either at the district level or pull out from the action steps with more specificity how those apply at elementary, middle, and high school, and fill those in. If you recall from last year's district improvement plan, there were evidence of achievement steps, and some of those were completed, most of them were completed, some were in progress, and some were deferred based on our experience over the course of the year. So the first goal is a social emotional safety procedural goal. That's been the majority of our focus for the last several months, has been opening schools safely and putting in procedures and protocols to keep our students safe, both physically and emotionally. The second goal has to do with making sure that students have a high quality academic experience at the same time. And so this goal focuses on creating a learning environment to motivate students to take academic risks, challenge themselves, and claim ownership of their own learning. Some of the action steps below that include some of our work with MCIEA related to performance assessments. Some have to do with how our teachers are using technology to engage students appropriately. Some have to do with how we support student collaboration and teacher collaboration during the pandemic to keep our academic focus strong. So 2 goals. One is more social, emotional, protocol, procedure, facility-based, and one is more academic-based. There are overlaps between the 2 goals, but in general, I'm fairly confident that these are reasonable goals that we can achieve and that we'll be able to measure whether we have achieved what we have set out to do. So I'm happy to answer any questions. I don't think we need to go through every one of the action steps, but I'm happy to answer questions about those. And what I would say about the 2 goals is that I think these are goals that our leadership team can get behind, that our central office can get behind, and that teachers will be able to understand and move forward on. So with that, Brian, I'll turn it over to you if there are any specific questions or suggestions. What I would caution us to not do is to add lots more goals for things that you know are happening in the district anyway, like the Lynch School building project, or other facilities and capital improvements, or personnel procedures. There are things we'll continue to work on to improve that aren't necessarily reflected in these district goals, but these should be goals that connect to every educator who works in the district.
Thank you, Judy. I put up the 2 goals. I'll take them down unless, if people have specific, I can leave them up actually for now, and then once we get into discussion, I can take them down if we need to. Before we go into questions and comments, no, that's fine. Yeah, I'll leave it up there. And is there any questions or comments from the committee? Thank you, Dr. Evans, Judy, Chris.
Happy.
Okay, so you're doing a screen share, so people won't see me waving this document, but you probably have it electronically if you wanted to pull it up. I wanted to just remind the committee knows this, but for those watching today, just reiterate, we developed district beacons a few years ago. I want to share with everybody what the Winchester Public Schools vision is for learning that we typically see kind of as the preamble to our district goals. It's pretty short. We believe that educators, parents, students, and the community co-create the conditions needed for all to thrive emotionally, socially, and academically. Our classrooms are respectful, inclusive, personalized learning spaces that support innovation and healthy risk-taking. Our learning community is built on a foundation of service, collaboration, and kindness, and our students gain the skills and knowledge needed to make healthy, balanced life choices. And our 3 beacons, then, this vision is summarized by 3 beacons which guide the success of both individual students and our wider learning community.
And I'm now sharing that, by the way.
Thank you. These beacons highlight our community's expectations and aspirations for ourselves. That's our students, our staff, and our schools. And these are really divided into individual pathways for success, communities of collaboration, and healthy balance and wellness. And it's always helpful for me, in one way or another, we review these as a school committee when we kick off this process. I think it's always been helpful that we literally attach it to the goals that we ultimately develop. So having said that, I wanted to, I guess, make a couple of quick observations. I think the beacons are terribly important. Judy's quite right. This is not a typical year. But in most years, one of the things we do is we pause and we look into we look backwards a little bit to see if there are things that we've been making good progress on that we should continue to stay focused on, and we call those continuation goals. And we've had some in the past. And Judy need not panic, because I'm not going to suggest we add more goals. I'd love to see us have 2, but I actually feel like we should have a continuation goal from last year and perhaps a new goal, which is, I think what I see as goal number 2, kind of feels right to me as something to focus on a new goal. But I wanted to share, I feel like goal number 1, which is to develop and execute effective plans, procedures, routines, and operational systems in accordance with COVID-19, DESE, and public health protocols. Particularly, I think when you work through some of these bullets, some of these items I feel like we've already discussed and even voted either implicitly or explicitly in our return to school plan. Not all of it, but a lot of it. And I sort of feel like a lot of this stuff is kind of what we expect we're already doing. And I know that this is front of mind for Judy and Jen and our principals and Jason and everybody. So I was just going to respectfully suggest that goal number 1, as it's suggested in this draft, feels kind of a little too operational and weedy for me to be a district goal. And so I wanted to go back to last year and propose a continuation goal, which I think dovetails right into the conversation we just wrapped up a few minutes ago around MCAS and MCIEA and performance assessments. But one of our goals last year was to expand the use of performance assessments in all grades and content areas to measure how well students learn, transfer, and apply knowledge and complex skills. And so I've been kind of wrestling with this one in my mind because I think this whole committee, we've seen some examples in which teachers are already reacting to this new normal. They're finding some powerful tools they didn't know that we had available, or they're using tools in a way they didn't know that they could. And I guess I kind of want to challenge us, Brian and Judy. Is this not the right time to really make an effort to almost start building a lessons learned? When we're on the backside of this and there's a vaccine and we do go back to normal, I would like normal to be better than it ever was. And I am excited. I mean, I know there are, in private industry and certain organizations, they're already beginning to envision how they will never operate quite the same anymore, but they'll operate better. And better can mean different things for a public school district. Better can mean more efficient. Better can be measured in terms of student growth and achievement. But, and I don't want to like go on forever, but I think it was in the spring, or maybe it was at some point, it was maybe one of our teachers actually. Some of the students who are the most quiet in a classroom setting and most introverted and unlikely to raise their hand and engaged are in some instances now the most engaged students because we're doing this differently and they have a device. And that was really meaningful to me. And I would actually suggest to all of us that we're seeing that among our peer adults in Winchester. We've seen more public participation and more public comment thanks to Zoom than we ever would sitting in a meeting at Parkhurst. And so I feel like this is a fantastic opportunity, certainly to stay focused on teaching our kids, but to find a way to collect and capture what's really working well so that we can almost develop a toolkit and build something even better in the following year. So I go back to expanding the use of performance assessments in all grades and content areas. Maybe it's, I can't even read my own handwriting, maybe expanding the use of teaching tools and performance assessments. How can we sort of capture what we're doing differently now? Not really with a specific goal to use it in a certain way, but just to be sure that when we're past all this, that if there's a 3rd grade teacher at Ambrose or a 7th grade teacher at McCall who knows in his or her mind they're going to do something differently from now on because it worked so well, that doesn't just stick with them, but there's a way we can gather that and discuss it and maybe make the whole institution better for it. Does that make sense?
Thanks, Chris. Judy, I don't know if you want to respond to anything there, or if you just want us to continue with questions and comments, and then sort of respond sort of holistically to everything that you hear.
Sure, just very briefly. And no, I think Chris makes an excellent point. We try to look at for the silver linings in everything. And I think it could be an additional action step to ensure that we use the feedback from teachers and students and parents to continue to improve our practices and learn from the experience. Not sure it's a separate goal. I would say that I do have a fear that we could lose focus on some of the things that we think are already done for the opening of school, not knowing what's going to happen in the next few months or for the rest of the school year. We need to be sure that we are mindful that continued look at the physical and virtual learning environments is going to be necessary, that we have to have a spirit of flexibility, collaboration, patience, as we face the unknown in the next few months. And so while on paper we heave a sigh of relief that we got everyone in on the first day, and a lot of people thought we weren't going to be able to, many school districts are just now opening this week, and we've been in for 5 weeks. I'm so proud of the efforts that we put in. It nearly, sent some of us right over the edge because it was so intensive. But I think there could be a similarly intensive effort in the next few months as we look at responding to the unknown that this goal encaptures. And I think it would be important to look at any decision we make through the lens of what's best for not only students' physical safety and health, but also their emotional and social needs as well, and keep our eye on that balance. So no, I agree with Chris. I think that we should capture in some formal way, the way we're going to learn from our experience and continue to improve as a district.
Thanks, Judy. The rest of the committee, are there other questions or comments in particular about anything that we're discussing? Michelle?
I guess I don't disagree with Chris either that we don't want to lose the work that we have done last year, particularly around the performance assessments and continuing that goal. But I guess I see where you've captured that more in goal 2 than in goal 1. My understanding, Jen, maybe particularly in Dr. Evans, was that that was where you were trying to capture that work and the continuation of that work. So perhaps maybe just the language in the introduction of that goal needs to be wordsmithed or perhaps expanded upon to capture that we are continuing to do the things that Chris is speaking of, and that we won't lose that. And in fact, the last bullet in that was support grade level teams in the use of school-wide and district performance assessment, creation, and validation. So maybe, and the one ahead of that as well. So maybe just capturing some of that in the language of goal 2 would be appropriate, and expanding upon or wordsmithing some of the bullet points within that to capture the lessons learned from this year also.
Yeah, good idea.
Karen or Zena? Or Chris, obviously we can go back to you. Zena, yes?
I feel like as the resident cheerleader of our school district, I really, really appreciated the focus of these goals. I felt that they were very responsive to our current needs and situation. There is a lot of opportunity to learn from how we've progressed, and like I keep throwing the word innovate today out there, and that could be done in line with budget planning time. But I really hope that we have enough tools in our tool belt around, sorry for the noise, around teacher empowerment to then empower our students, whether it is through the use of technology, whether it is making better choices around what projects to take on. I really hope that we've given our teachers enough to really carry us through with goal number 2. I think that is one of the most critical goals in terms of preparing our kids for the future, because unfortunately, I don't think we'll ever go back to the normal we had, or fortunately, it depends on what we do with it. We have so many opportunities to really think about our technology use and how that's impacting learning. There's a lot of good that can come out of goal number 2. And goal number 1, of course, that's always a priority. So I appreciate this work, and I look forward to seeing how we move forward and what the teachers are empowered to do with them.
Sure. And could I ask you to speak to the Wednesday collaboration time grade level content area and how teachers are using that and how we're capturing the results of that collaboration? Because I think members of the community who think we're only using Wednesdays for deep cleaning don't understand how organized and structured the time is around capturing what we're able to capture on innovation and planning ahead to ensure that all students have equitable access to the high quality academic standards and high achievement levels. So Jen, I don't know if you want to speak to that.
Sure. So as Judy said, that time is extremely valuable to us. Lori worked on doing a clear schedule that really set out some consistency. So part of that day, obviously, teachers have their individual prep time, but the bulk of that day is spent in collaboration in some way. And for right now, what they're doing is obviously they work on developing the choice board so that there's consistency across grade levels. But they also spent a lot of their time at the beginning of the year on those curriculum overview templates that will be going out. So those will be posted on the website this week. What they really were trying to do is make sure that there's consistency with what their focus is with the standards-based, consistency with the performance-based assessments they'll use, consistency with what are the essential questions. What should really drive us is that higher order thinking that they're really pushing with the students. So throughout the year, they'll be spending time revisiting each of those pieces, and also scheduled with, we just put out our meeting calendar. So we have one Tuesday afternoon a month that's also a department or a grade level meeting for an hour after school. And those will really be driven working with directors and coordinators and coaches on capturing what are those best practices we're seeing, what do we see as working. The beauty of those roles, as we've said a million times, thank you for the addition to the roles, especially at the elementary where we didn't have that instructional leadership piece before. What those people are able to do is make sure that A, we capture what the best practices are, B, that we're putting those in place across the board, but then they can work on developing professional development workshops on our PD days that help people really delve into that. And then they also can go into the classrooms virtually or in person and coach people with the implementation, and then bring it back to this grade level or the department across the board to be able talking about what is working best, what are our students responding to. And as we know, this is, not just a different year, but it's an opportunity. As Chris said, we are capturing some learners in ways that we never have before. So we want to make sure that those practices work, as well as practices for students who, do prefer to be in person. So again, it's an ability to give that voice and choice, and for us to continue to say, here are a variety of best practices that work differently for different students, and we need to incorporate all of these pieces so we meet those different needs. So that time will also be time that they're working on, a lot of them have common unit plans that they're working. So refining those unit plans, what activities are most effective? What is really hooking students? Engagement is a big deal right now. And it's interesting because people are saying, well, engaging is hard now on the computer and over Zoom. But what's fascinating is, students being present in class never guaranteed engagement. And even non-disruptive behavior in the classroom never guaranteed engagement. As we all know, we've sat in places before where we're making our grocery list in our heads. So God knows what they're doing in their heads, but that's not always engagement. So how do we make our practices more meaningful, that they are hooked and part of it, rather than us just delivering information? As Judy has said many times, for the most part, our students are vastly compliant. In some ways, that's a disadvantage, because it is okay then to slip into giving them information that they will go home and study and work on, or get a tutor, or go to an extra program. It doesn't mean that they're truly understanding it, or that they're pondering the essential questions, which is really that higher order thinking we want to get them to. So these Wednesdays, I think, will really help to move us to that piece. And you've heard from the teachers time and again that the best silver lining out of all of this has been their sharing and collaboration that they've never done before, because everybody returned to being a first-year teacher all over again, is what it felt like. So that we've kept that ball rolling, and the teachers have done an awesome job of keeping that rolling themselves. So I think we're seeing cross-pollination better than we ever have, and that'll continue with the Wednesdays.
Jen, can you just clarify, is that taking place at the high school level as well? Because I know that they're in school till 3:07 on Wednesdays, I believe. So I'm sure how it's happening at the high school level.
Yeah, so no, most classes aren't in school until 3:07, although there are some classes, because they didn't fit in the schedule, that do run in the afternoon. The bulk of the people have collaboration time built in there. And if they don't, because they are teaching some of those classes, you're right, they're building in collaboration time elsewhere. And it was less structured at the high school to begin with than it was at the elementary and middle. But starting last week, it started to get more structured, and it will going forward.
Great, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Michelle, I think you had a question.
Yeah, just listening to Jen, Judy, I also wonder about that goal too. It does not say anything about intentional teacher collaboration. And I wonder if you would like to capture that, both for the teachers to recognize the time that they put into it, and that it is a goal for us that they spend that incredible amount of time that Jen is talking about, and that we value it both as a school committee and a community and a town. Because, you know, in terms of like talking about, going back to what Chris was saying earlier, things that we might want to carry with us going forward, we may want to look at how we do build intentional collaboration time into our schedules going forward. So having that as part of our goals may actually be valuable in that way. So that was my first. I just wanted to react to what Jen said, because I have heard from teachers how valuable that time is, and that it's not just a scheduling error or a scheduling necessity as part of the deep cleaning, but it is something that we value. I wanted to go back and ask you real quickly about goal 1, because of something else that Jen had said earlier, and that you have said, that we only have 170 days with kids in school this year. We have split that up into 2 cohorts, A and B. I just wanted some feedback from all of you. That seems like an incredible amount of work in goal A. Goal 1. Goal 2 seems like things that we have built as part of collaboration and curriculum development, and are happening organically as part of teaching. Goal 1 seems like some of that could be a lot of additional work. And I just want to make sure that we are focusing this year, just like the students are focusing and the teachers are focusing on their core standards. If there are not core values that you want to pull out of goal 1, so that we're not overburdening administrative or teaching staff in trying to do too much.
Thanks. Judy, you're muted.
I think that's an excellent point. What I would say is, when we come down to filling in the evidence of achievement, some of these might fall by the wayside as more difficult to easily measure and hold people accountable for. If it's simply something that we can do as a central office, it probably doesn't belong on here. If it's something that can translate down to the level of teachers and principals within schools, then it belongs on here. And so I agree with you. There are a lot of bullets on one. We might be able to merge a couple and streamline it a little bit. Doesn't mean they're not going to happen. It just means it's not going to trickle down to the individual teacher level for accountability. So I think that's a valid suggestion.
Thank you. I know Karen had raised her hand before, and then I'll go to you, Chris, next.
Oh, I just wanted to return to what Jen had been talking about with the Wednesday collaborative time. Could you provide for me a specific example, like maybe at any particular grade level, just about some of the ideas and things that have been worked or that teachers have been working on together and have improved upon? I know you had talked like in general umbrella fashion. So just
I think the two things we focus on mainly when you think about any kind of work that we're doing individually, collaboratively, as a district, are content and pedagogy. So those are kind of the two big umbrellas. So I'll give you an example of each. So as you know, we have our next generation science standards that we've been rolling out our implementation on for a couple of years. So in a couple of the grades, there's some standards that are very new. In fact, many of the standards changed grade level or what they needed to do with them. And so there's a couple that are much more challenging, I would say. Important concepts, and we don't disagree, but much more challenging. So for instance, Catherine will spend time with a specific grade level. Catherine Dwyer, our science coordinator, for those who don't know, with a specific grade level on that standard, how to build a unit, what lessons to make sure the students have, what are the scaffolded pieces that they need to get to it, how do we assess it? And as always, if you've even listened to Catherine speak for 30 seconds, she'll talk all about the hands-on piece, which we love. So a big part of her work with them will be, how do we make sure the students are doing it and the teachers aren't just teaching the concept? So that's an example around, well, actually that's both, but I was talking about content in particular with that one, because that would be a new content area for teachers. So part of what Catherine provides that's so helpful is teaching them a little bit more about that standard, right? Because as we know for elementary, they have to be an expert in all of their content areas. So really bringing in that content expertise, if there's a new piece, is what I would say is super meaningful with that collaborative time. And last year, they literally, each grade level had like 2 hours of that time. Besides PD days where they could choose workshops, they met, each grade level met with Catherine, maybe not even twice for each grade level. Some grade levels only got 1 hour. So our ability to go much deeper and help teachers in that way is vastly improved this year. And then I'll give you a pedagogy piece. So obviously all students are virtual at some point right now, even our hybrid students. So a piece that Betty, our new elementary instructional coach, is working on. And by the way, I'm sorry, I'm using elementary examples just because I've been meeting with them so much lately, but certainly these same pieces happen at the secondary level. So one of the things that Betty's really drilling down to help with is how to engage over Zoom. What tools, when we use the interactive pieces, or not even with Zoom, also with Google Classroom, when we use Jamboard so that everybody can brainstorm on a virtual whiteboard at the same time. That's what we mean when we talk about student engagement. They're not passively just learning, but the teacher has introduced something, given the students time to reflect, and now the students are doing something with it, so we're sure they're engaged with the concept. So that's something that I would say is like a pedagogy piece that each grade level will get support and help with during their collaboration time on Wednesdays.
Great. Thank you.
You're welcome.
And then I was just also going to say that in general, I also support what Chris had been saying about reflecting on and capturing what we've learned this year, because we will come out on the other end at some point, and I think we as a district will be changed. It's just inevitable. So being able to visualize and carry forward the lessons that we've learned, I think is super important.
Thank you, Karen. I think there was discussion of that somehow being captured in goal 2 somehow. So I think that's a great point. Chris, I know you had asked a question or had a question.
I guess since I'd like the opportunity to just come back to my remarks, especially under goal 1, and some other members have touched on this, just the number of action steps. I think there's 11 bullets right now. And I think we all agree that's a lot of action steps. But in looking over prior years, going back a little bit, 5 and 6 tends to be as many action steps as we typically develop. And so I just had a couple of observations and suggestions for Judy. We have, I think it's bullet number 5 and 6. We have 2 bullets, one follows the other, dealing with ruler. But those seem like they could really be collapsed into one if that's something that we feel is important. But then I just want to go back to the overarching comment, which is there are some elements in my mind of goal 1 that really are about the things that we expect we're doing every day and that we should be doing, and that I would push back to the committee and to the superintendent and suggest things that we're required to do by law don't need to be in a district improvement goal. I think what we should really be just reminding ourselves, the purpose of this is to enhance student growth and achievement. And so, for instance, it's a requirement by law that our learning environments be accessible. We're required to provide systems, equipment, and supplies to keep our students and staff safe. And if we weren't doing that, Judy would hear about it right away from us or parents or teachers. And so I would suggest that, bullet number 1, bullet number 3, I feel don't need to be in this list because they in a way detract from some of the other things on this list that are really interesting, that are not required by law, that can be more innovative and impactful on student growth. So I look at equity walks as an example. That's not required by law, but that can be terribly impactful, maybe even especially this year because we have fewer students in the building and there may be more contact time then between building administrators and teachers. When I first was trying to envision what this looks like, I can almost imagine work up on the wall, student work on the wall. What are students seeing in their day-to-day routine? And so given that we're kind of in this AABB remote model, this may be a perfect year to really focus on something like that. And so I would suggest that SMART goals are really helpful because we can measure them. And those, particularly when we have an action item with words that are in quotes, it kind of calls some attention that we need to be really clear and explain what's the purpose, what are we trying to accomplish, and I think that could be really meaningful. So I would just strongly suggest we try to limit action steps to like no more than 6, and have suggested some ways to do it. But I just feel like right now as a draft, goal number 1, I feel like is kind of trying to do 2 different things. I think the emotional and social needs of students and teachers is important, but there's some things in here that we would just be expected to do anyway. So that's all. I don't want it to distract from some really deliberate efforts to be kind of innovative on our part.
Thanks, Chris.
Judy,
and
can
Michelle,
I
go
ask
ahead.
why, Dr. Evans, you felt the need to include all of those COVID-related operations and procedures that Chris is referring to in number 1?
So
where that came from? I'm trying to understand how they ended up there in the first place.
So they ended up there because I need to reinforce the importance of all teachers, students, and administrators in keeping their eye on every decision that they make has to first be focused on physical safety and health and emotional and social needs of students. And as we go through the year, the things that we thought would work well when we were making decisions, I want to be sure that we continue to look through that lens first, because no student can learn if the student doesn't feel safe, either physically safe or emotionally safe. Neither can teachers teach in those conditions. And I'm concerned that both in the physical environment and in the virtual environment, we have to continue to look through that lens as we move forward. We will follow all of the compliance related safety recommendations from the DESE and public health, but we have to be vigilant and flexible as we go through the year, because we don't know what is in front of us, and it is an unusual year. So if we're going to hold teachers accountable for that, it's easy to say, how are you specifically in either your physical environment or your virtual environment focusing on making sure that your classroom is accessible, welcoming, and safe? And that's an easily understood action step that a teacher can then be open about. What additional professional development do I need or support do I need to make sure that happens? What tools do I need to have in my instructional repertoire to make sure that that happens? So it's as much the physical environment and how you're organizing it, which is highly unique this year, and very much under the control of individual teachers, and then the virtual environment, which is completely under the control of individual teachers. And so I included more of the things that are typical that we would not include in order to flesh those out with more evidence of achievement in discussion with the leadership team than I normally would. I agree that there are too many here, but I think if we just assume that that piece is done and we don't hold individual people accountable for sort of assessing it as the year goes on and making changes that are necessary, then our students won't be well served. So it's kind of a balance that I'm trying to strike here, Michelle.
So if I may first, Zena, and then I'll go to you, because I want to speak to that point. I respectfully think that I don't know exactly if this wording is right, but that it should be in this goal, because that is honestly, I feel like the main goal we should have for the entire year. If we could only have one bullet point for the entire year, it would be keep our kids safe. I mean, to somehow say now, well, of course we're going to do that, let's focus on other things. I guess in other years we could say we'd have one bullet point is educate the kids, and we'd say, well, of course we're going to do that. But so I can see the point that Chris is making. At the same time, this is hopefully a one-off year, not a forever. And this year of all years, if we don't have as one of our goals to ensure physical and virtual safe environments, I think we're dropping the ball if that's not one of our goals. So I just want to throw that. I have some other comments, but I still want to let the committee respond. But I would be uncomfortable taking out, re-wordsmithing it, changing it, making it one instead of two. All fine with me, but I think it has to be in there somewhere.
Sure.
So Zena, sorry, I cut you off, but I just want to respond to that.
Actually, it was perfect because that's exactly what I was going to respond to. I think it's reflective of what our teachers are still talking about and what their concerns are. So I think this is incredibly responsive and acknowledges the work that they expect of us. It holds us accountable for the safety measures that DESE has put forward and CDC and all of the professionals. So I actually think it's exactly where it needs to be. I think it should be part of goal number one, and it should be at the top of the list because of just how worried people still are, and how it's coming out that, COVID rates are going to be skyrocketing in the winter, and all of this news that's coming out. It shows that we are keeping updated on that, and we are constantly working toward it. It's not a one and done. So now we have masks in the school, we're done. No, there's so much more that has to be consciously done day in and day out. And I agree with you, Brian. We'll look irresponsible if that isn't top of our list.
Thank you, Zena. Additional questions or comments? I have a couple, but I wanted to give everybody else a chance to go. So maybe I'll just go ahead.
I was just
Michelle.
going to say, Brian, I agree with what you and Zena have said, but I also agree with what Chris has said. And I think I said it a little bit earlier that I think it's important to acknowledge it, but I feel like number one is such an incredible amount of work that by the same token, I want to keep track of what our responsibilities are, but I also don't want to overwhelm our staff and our educators with so much to do in such a challenging year. And when it becomes part of district goals, the message we send to the educators is that these are things we expect them to be held accountable for as well. So I just want to make sure that we are setting realistic and measurable goals, as well as goals that we think are important. And I think that I know Dr. Evans is still working on what the evidence of these would be. And I would think that maybe when the draft comes back to us after the evidence of these bullet points is made clear, that some of these bullet points may then collapse. And it may not be 4 at the top, it may then be 2, and the 2 ruler goals may become 1. And I think that it might become clear. I think we're missing a piece of the puzzle right now, and it's what the evidence of these things is going to be.
Right.
Thanks, Michelle. No, I think that's a really good point. There are a lot of action steps here, and I think that we've all sort of said that. Whether or not they can be collapsed, I think is something that Judy can obviously look at before our next time we look at this. I have a general question, general comment, then a specific question. When I look at these goals, and I think I told you this, Judy, the other day I was talking, I feel like you described them today better than me reading them when you said the first one's operational, the second one's about high quality academics. I feel like the text of the goals doesn't read it that clearly. I feel like they sort of, so what you did, that, I love that. What I read here, I sort of feel like they're the same goal. Goal 1 and goal 2 to me read very differently, not the action, very similarly, not the action steps, but the goals themselves. So I feel like it might be helpful. I know you say operational systems, but then in the second goal, we also have create and maintain a safe and collaborative learning environment. That sounds pretty operational too. So I think I don't want to do it. I'm sure you're better at it than I am, but wordsmithing a little bit just to be clearer that there really are different goals. They're not the same goal. So that was just a sort of a general comment.
I'm happy to do that.
Very specific question, and it's probably more specific than we want to get into. But as far as the action steps on the goal 1, if I go down to conduct equity walks, both in person and virtual, to support and reinforce anti-racist, just an observation, it feels like a better action step would be support and reinforce an anti-racist and culturally responsive school environment. And the action, the measurement might be, district of evidence of achievement might be that we've performed equity walks, we've done this, that, or the other thing. Because as it's written right there, it feels like the only action step is we're going to do these equity walks and then we're done. And I know that that's far from the truth. So I think it goes back to sort of collapsing these, and once you get the sort of the evidence of achievement, that you'll say, yeah, that makes more sense. So I think Michelle's point was really good one, that we're looking at half the puzzle. Maybe you didn't say puzzle, half the picture with some of the puzzle pieces aren't in. So that was just the 2 observations I had that I wanted to make.
Sure. So one thing I would point out is that some of the language in some of the goals and the action steps, not all the action steps, came directly from the DESE's Educator Evaluation instrument and the indicators contained within them. And so I kept the language very similar so that as the evaluations were completed, teachers could connect their goals directly to the evaluation indicators and standards using the same language. And so that's why it looks a little funky, not typically the way I would have worded it, which is probably a little simpler and clearer. But so I think there's a good compromise to be had that will naturally fall once I think some of these things that are listed as action steps are really evidence of achievement or measurement. And so, collapsing some of those and putting them under the evidence of achievement and making it clearer that the first goal is really about all elements of student safety, and the second goal is really about academic achievement. I think we can do that. I'm glad Chris reminded me to put the beacons and the mission as the first page of this, which we always do, and I think it's incredibly helpful. I don't know that we share it enough, publicize it enough, but I can tell you that it's at the heart of everything that we do as a central office or a leadership team, kind of looking through that lens, and we need to be sure that the two goals mirror that as well. So thank you for suggesting that, Chris, and we'll make sure that gets in the next draft.
Thank you. Karen.
I just remembered, Judy, you had mentioned at the beginning of this discussion about the focal indicators, and could you, last year I remember like there were little single word focal indicators. Maybe this was on, maybe this was something different, but could you just give an indication of what some of those focal indicators are that
Sure.
we have down the road?
Sure. So the indicators are related to the standards that are part of the educator evaluation process, and the ones that the DESE has said the focus indicators for leading for this year should be curriculum instruction, environment, HR management, family communication, and cultural proficiency. And so I pulled the two that I thought encompassed several of the focus areas and embedded them within these two goals. But a lot of the language, if you go to the DESE website and you look up and you just do a search for educator evaluation, you can get to the page where they've got these multi-page guides for teachers and leaders on how they're trying to point us in a direction of focus areas for feedback, collaboration, and support for individual teachers. What they're trying to do, I think, is acknowledge that in this unusual year, rather than giving teachers feedback and support on all standards, that we should focus on certain elements of certain standards, and that will help us meet the needs of students in a pandemic. And so that's how I tried to align it. But if you want, I mean, I can share them. They're rather lengthy documents, but they just came out, after school started. But I can send those out to you if that would be helpful too, if you want to look at it.
That would be great. Thank you so much.
I was going to ask if you could send us the link, because I had been looking, I did not find that on DESE's website. The latest I could find for educator evaluation was from like February or the spring or something. So that would be helpful.
Okay.
Thank you. And if you could help us, Judy, what do you see as the next steps on this? When will we be ready to revisit the district improvement plan and goals? Just walk us through what our next steps are, because I think you've got some feedback from us that I think I hope is helpful. I hope it's all seemed productive. And when we might want to see this again.
Sure. So I have a leadership team meeting tomorrow, and I was hoping to do another iteration of this before then, get feedback from the leadership team, then do another iteration, probably not ready for next Tuesday, but for the meeting following. And I should have a pretty well fleshed out version of it by then, where you could vote that night or, take another meeting and vote the following meeting. The other thing I would also say is district goals are not a static document that you can vote it, and then 4 months from now we might need to add a goal or revise some of these goals depending on where we're landing with the great unknown of this pandemic. And so if I bring a draft to you, not this next meeting on Tuesday, but the following meeting that you're fairly comfortable with, that you could vote. That would help us then communicate to teachers what the district goals are, and keep our focus on that in terms of the evaluation process. We have a lot of new teachers in the district. They're already getting their observations and they're getting feedback. We are trying to keep it an incredibly collaborative process where it's not a gotcha, but it's a coaching model where teachers are identifying what their needs are. Similarly, all of the people who are evaluators on the professional development day are going to offer tailored professional development that meets what teachers are asking for and what they need. And Jen has already surveyed teachers on that. All of us share a joint responsibility to be sure that our teachers feel supported this year, and that they, and all our other educators as well, who also participate in professional development, all of our staff members do. So, we're looking forward to continuing to support them, not only on the PD day, but on the Wednesday collaboration time as well, the department meeting time after school, the staff meeting time after school. Everything is about continuous learning. And all of us have to be humble in this new world where, Jen keeps saying everybody's a first-year teacher because nobody's ever done this before. And that's absolutely true.
Thank you, Judy. And as that was very helpful. As I look forward, not that we're beyond this at future agenda items or calendar yet, but we are meeting on the 20th. It sounds like you won't have it fully fleshed out by then, and I respect that. That's less than a week away. But then we don't meet as a committee again until the 10th of November, because we normally meet on the 3rd, but that's election day, and we elected not to meet on that day because it's also PD day. Is this something we can? I just wanted to ask the committee as a whole and you, is this something that we would want to meet again prior, because we're talking about almost a month from now before we would have a chance to review these again. I'm wondering if it's something that maybe we might consider having another standalone workshop on this again, so that we could vote on the 10th potentially. I don't know if that's the right thing. I'm just throwing that out there because I don't know if the 10th is too late. The 10th of November to be voting on these, especially if potentially there are more questions and we're not able to vote, and we're talking about voting on the 17th or later. I don't know if there's a question embedded in there. It was just a comment.
So what I would say is, the other group I forgot to mention that I'd like to get feedback from is actually the staff members as a whole. So when we have a draft that the leadership team is comfortable with, I like to send it out to teachers and everyone who works in the district, so that they can feedback as well and ask questions. So if we wait till the 10th, that'll give me time to get their feedback and do a final draft for you.
Okay.
So
Can I weigh? Can I weigh in on that for a sec too, Brian?
Absolutely, Michelle.
So I would just say that just because we haven't voted these doesn't mean the district isn't working on them, and that if we fundamentally agree that this is the direction that we want to go, and that our concern is how we're going to measure these things and how we're going to streamline these things, that is a different discussion. Maybe if there's perhaps a way that once Dr. Evans has a draft early, after meeting with the key stakeholders besides school committee, that she could distribute that to us well in advance of November 10th, so that we know in what direction that we're headed. That may give us a sense of security that the district goals are headed in the direction that we want. Did you lose me?
No, we hear you perfectly.
Okay. But that doesn't mean that we're not actually working on these. Am I off base there, Dr. Evans? Or
not at all. No, I think it's a good point.
And I think that's a great point too. I mean, some of these action steps, as Chris mentioned, are things that we did to open the school and that we're going to continue to do. It's perfectly reasonable to have goals. I mean, if we're developing our goals in November, it's perfectly reasonable that we have been working on those goals since the beginning. So I think that makes sense. I just wanted to make sure that we didn't come around to the 10th of November and have a committee revolt saying, we haven't, we should have gotten to these sooner. I think that there's a lot of things we'd like to have gotten to sooner this year that have been sort of taking a little bit longer because of COVID.
Mhm.
So that sounds like we have a path forward. Are there any closing comments from any committee members before we move on in the agenda, which is essentially just wrap up?
I would just
Chris?
offer, with respect to our earlier conversation this morning, that Commissioner Riley has uploaded his memo to the board for their upcoming meeting, which is on Tuesday, the 20th. And there is no mention of MCAS anywhere in his talking points, nor is it on the agenda. It does not appear to me that the board's going to talk about MCAS. And then following that, their next meeting, I think, is November 17th. So it seems to me there's like maybe 3 board meetings before we're suddenly into the prep and administration and MCAS in January. So the clock is really running on this. I wanted to ask if I'd already emailed our Representative Day. I think, Zena, if you are our legislative liaison, is there somebody who could like reach out to Senator Lewis and just ask what's going on the Senate side in terms of any action on Beacon Hill that speaks directly towards waiving off MCAS? I do understand something's happening there, and I just think it'd be helpful for the school committee to understand what's going on.
I'm happy to reach out to all of them with our proposed and not yet as voted on resolution, just to give them a heads up that this is something that's on our radar and to see what they're doing to help us get there.
That would be great. Thank you, Zena. And thank you for the suggestion, Chris. Seeing that, and it's almost noon, I'd like to give everybody a chance to, especially those of you who are working in central office, to actually have lunch. So I'm going to move on to future agenda items. These are future agenda items, not necessarily for next week, although some will be for next week. Personnel update will probably not be till the November meeting.
Mhm.
We have an enrollment report, which we will have at this next meeting. Lynch School Building Project, I don't think we have a specific agenda item on this for our next meeting planned, but we will have that. Return to school is one of our consistent agenda items. We won't necessarily have anything grand to talk about, but we want to always have that as an item so people can discuss. Budget update, we will have at our following meeting. Morocco update, that should really say capital update. And Chris, I've asked, and I don't know if you're available to give a capital update at the next meeting. That was the plan. Thank you. I'll also give a town meeting update. I'm sure you've all seen some of the emails. I'm working on preparing a town meeting presentation that will be 5 minutes and it will be recorded at WinCam. Karen and I will be giving that presentation. 5 minutes is really short, so really short. So I'll go over some of the things that we're planning on talking about at the next meeting. Mascot logo update. We're not quite ready for a presentation on that, but we'll have that at a future meeting. And then district's goals and improvement plan, as we mentioned, that won't be at the next meeting, but we'll be, well, we just spent an hour and a half talking about that. Next meeting dates, October 20th at 6 p.m., November 10th at 9:30 a.m. That's technically listed as a budget workshop in our calendar. However, it's going to be a posted meeting. So I suspect that that meeting will include budget, but I think it will also be a regular meeting since that's our next meeting after this. And that's where we'll have the goals and improvement plan. November 17th at 6 p.m. And that's what we have for future meetings. Well, we had no other votes. I would happily take a motion to adjourn right
Can
before
I ask
noon.
a question first, Brian?
Absolutely.
So with respect to budget update, I want you to revisit the budget update piece. So typically in October, we revise the budget based on, encumbrances we can take and retirements and so forth. We talked about this at the last meeting. So are we getting sort of a high level update on the 20th? And then did you say we're taking some action on the budget on November 10th? Or maybe I didn't hear you right.
So I'll let Judy speak to that. I'm not anticipating a budget update on the 20th. This is not a normal year, and we have a lot of
Moving parts still.
moving parts. Thank you. I couldn't think of the word. Judy, if you want to speak to that, that would be great.
Sure.
If you'll indulge me, not too deep because we don't have it as an agenda item, but just sort of where we're going to be on it. Thank you.
Just as in terms of discussing for future agenda items. So several different pieces to the budget. One is typically in the fall. Ellen reminds me it's usually November, might have been October when previous Director of Finance was here, is the budget realignment for the current fiscal year, where once we know what our personnel changes have been and other expense categories, then we have school committee vote to realign some of the individual lines. The bottom line budget stays the same, but we reshuffle within if we're able to do so. This year is such an unusual year. We can't do it until November because we still have some moving parts for personnel. And that's the biggest single sort of movement. Also, there are some current year grant figures, especially tapping into the town cares grant. That's going to have an impact on our regular budget. So we need to make sure all of those moving pieces are completed. We also need to have the preliminary budget, which we always do in November, starting with projected enrollment for FY22 budget planning. And Chris made some good points last meeting about making sure we make it through the year whole. And then at the same time planning for the following year. It's a lot of detail that is some of which is out of our control, particularly with special education expenses. So it could be a intensive budget development period and adjustment to the current budget. I would share very briefly that at the department head meeting for the town yesterday, we had discussion about all town departments and where they are in the current year budget and what adjustments may need to be made at town meeting or with the finance committee. Right now, Ellen and I, fingers crossed, think we're going to be okay for the current fiscal year. But there are a lot of unknowns ahead of us, and the continuation of additional federal funding is quite in question beyond December. So a lot of unknowns. So Chris is right. We typically do a budget realignment in late October, early November, and we will do that again in early November this year. And then we'll start our projected enrollment, which is the first step for the FY22 budget at a November meeting as well. And then heavily into December, start working on the FY22 other components of the FY22 budget.
Thank you, Judy. Yeah, it is the timeline, Chris, at least as far, again, as we're not going to get into the details of it, but is the timeline that's being proposed clear?
It is. I mean, I agree with Judy. This is an unprecedented year. So if anything, I feel better if we were doing it sooner rather than later. I feel like November is a little late, but I guess my only request would be, given that we've got items, you just reviewed them under future agenda items, the mascot logo update. There are some elements of that plan that have some costs associated with them. So I'm hopeful that we're being mindful about costs, discretionary versus non-discretionary costs in this particular year, right? Given all the expenses we have, limited revenues. I want to be sure our conversations are in the right order, if you will, so that we don't, burden ourselves with another $25,000, $30,000, or $40,000 worth of costs if that's something we can tackle next year while still making progress on something else that's important to us.
Exactly.
Thank you, Chris. So those are our next meeting dates. I would take a motion to adjourn.
Motion to adjourn.
Thank you.
Second.
Thank you. We are required to have a roll call vote. Michelle?
Aye.
Zena?
Aye.
Chris?
Aye.
Karen?
Aye.
I vote aye as well. Thank you, everyone, for adding in 2 hours in the middle of your week for another meeting. I appreciate it. I'll see you all next Tuesday at 6.